Mr. Vice President, thank you for your time. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Marni. Good to be back.
All right. So let's start with this shutdown that Tom was just mentioning. We are at yet another impasse with this Saturday deadline looming. 4 days away, former President Trump on Truth Social said to Republicans, unless you get everything, shut it down. And he called Mitch McConnell weak and a conflicted leader. Where do you stand?
Well, look, first and foremost, people need to understand, I served in the Congress for 12 years. I was a House conservative leader. We went through more than a few standoffs. In fact, back in 2005, we secured more than $100 billion in budget cuts in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. But it all takes a willingness to stand firm. And House Republicans today are the last line of defense for taxpayers. So I commend all the conservatives in the House. They're standing strong. But at the end of the day, I really do believe they're going to find a way forward, particularly when it comes to support for the Department of Defense and for veterans. But it's just so important that we make some initial down payment on fiscal responsibility. And if I'm president of the United States, we're going to move on to the real drivers of the largest national debt since World War II, and that is the entitlements that represent 70% of the federal budget. I mean, all of what's happening in Washington today is arguing over about 10% of the budget. But the truth is, what's driving inflation today, what's waging war on the wages of American families today is that massive national debt. If I'm president, we'll take it on. We'll bring common sense reforms to Social Security and Medicare for younger Americans while we preserve them for people that are in retirement today or will retire in the next 2 decades.
Americans face so many challenging issues right now, but they're growing frustrated with what they're seeing happening in Washington, D.C. How do we get to a place where members of Congress can talk about these important issues instead of attacking one another in sound bites?
Well, Marni, I think it's a wonderful question. We're going to be at the Reagan Library tomorrow night. I actually became a Republican because of Ronald Reagan. I mean, it was his conservative vision for the country, but also it was his optimism and his commitment to civility that made it possible for him to lead an administration that not only transformed America after years of a failed Democrat administration. Remember, the 70s may sound familiar. The 1970s, inflation was out of control. Gasoline prices were through the roof. America had been embarrassed on the world stage. Reagan came in with that combination of optimism, vision, and civility, brought the Congress together, moved the nation forward, and revived us at home and abroad. That's what we need. We don't need the man. We need to return to that combination. And I hope to have the opportunity tomorrow night at the Reagan Library to point out that I'm the most consistent conservative in this race. I'm the most qualified conservative in this race, but I think I have a reputation for optimism and civility that if I'm president will create the conditions where we can solve some of these intractable problems that are literally exhausting the American people.
Yeah, and Americans asking for more. This UAW strike has ballooned in the last week. Thousands of our nation auto workers remain on strike. Today, as I mentioned, the president will be joining them on the picket line. You say you stand with the American worker. They're asking for a 40% pay raise, 32-hour work week. They want their pensions back. Are these reasonable demands?
Well, I'd leave that to their negotiations, but I'll tell you that when I look at this economy, I mean, Bidenomics has failed, Marni, and I think what's driving auto workers around the country to those picket lines, and I hope Joe Biden hears about it, is number one, under Bidenomics, wages are not keeping up with inflation. That's a fact, whether you're an auto worker or you're working in any other job in this country. Secondly, I got to tell you, that Green New Deal that they stuffed in their Inflation Reduction Act is waging war on gasoline-powered auto workers' manufacturing facilities. I mean, the mandates, the subsidies, a lot of which go to China that makes most of your electric car batteries in the world. I think auto workers know what's going on here. And while I expect we're going to continue to hear the rhetoric of class warfare coming out of the leadership of the UAW, I tell you, the auto workers I know back home in Indiana and around the country, they're great Americans, they're patriotic, and they get it. They get it. The Bidenomics has failed. Wages aren't keeping up with inflation. and this Green New Deal threatens the entire domestic automotive industry with these green mandates. And I'm kind of hoping somebody on that picket line pulls Joe Biden aside and says, let me tell you what the real problem is.
Well,
it's you and it's your policies.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.